Okay, hi. I'm in a different place in my house than I normally am when I'm filming. I have recently started into... That wasn't a sentence. In the last few weeks, I have been dealing with a lot of sciatic nerve pain, so I can't sit for long periods of time or stand for long periods of time without some form of movement, which means I can't sit to do a wrap up. So this is going to be a very strange, very weird experimental wrap up. Some of this is going to be while my husband and I are on walks. Some of it's just going to be footage of my dogs walking while I'm talking about books. Some of it's going to be me in bed. And this first portion is going to be me dusting this shelf thing over here while I talk about the books that I read in July and August. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start that. I have a microphone on, so you should be able to still hear me. Also, if you hear dogs crying, they're upset because they're with me for the third day of the row instead of with my husband in the garage. So that's fun. You also might hear the washer. My mouse just fucked up the camera because she's in a bad mood and it's everyone else's problem. Okay, so I need to talk about a lot of these books that I read in these months. So, see me making piles of shit, I'm sorry. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about today is Via Negativa by Daniel Hornsby. This was a literary fiction about a priest who was going through a rather difficult time in his life. He has recently left his parish. Is that the right word? I wasn't raised Catholic, I don't know. But he's left his church that he's been at for some time. He was all but asked to leave, and he is trying to figure out what he wants to do with the rest of his life and where he is going to belong after this. This was overall a 3-star for me, at least on Goodreads. I think by the time I was done with it, it was more of like a 3.5. It was really enjoyable, really sad, which just kind of happens a lot in literary fiction. It was... That's where our paper was. Okay, sorry. It was a good story. It was extremely slow. I read it over the course of several weeks. I'm gonna hit the... One second. I read it over the course of several weeks, and I'm really glad I took my time with it. It was something that, while not the most impactful book that I've ever read, I think it had a good message. It knew what story it wanted to tell, and it worked very hard at telling that story the right way. It briefly touches on the abuse that a lot of children faced in the Catholic Church, but it does so in a very respectful way. I thought the conflict that I felt like the places where the story went weren't always completely expected, which I enjoyed. I didn't expect some of the twists and turns along the way. Some of them I absolutely did, and it handled all of them with a lot of grace. I do think that a lot of the things that the story discussed and talked about aren't always handled very well, and they aren't always handled delicately. And I do think that this story made such an effort to talk about things not only delicately, but with an air of, confidence without shying away from it, but also without trying to gloss over it. It's very weird. It was handled really well. I don't know the better way to say it. And overall, it was a fun read. Okay, so next up, I'm going to talk about, stop it. I'm going to talk about Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington. This is a nonfiction book that talks about the, how does it put it? It talks about the medical experimentation done on Black people, primarily in the United States across its history. Okay, so this one is going to sit with me for such a long time. There's a point early, I believe in the prologue, whenever the author is discussing when she was writing it and she was working at a hospital, and one of the doctors pulled her aside and said, "Oh, I heard you're working on this. Can you tell me what the name of it is?" And when she said it was medical apartheid, the doctor immediately started harassing her and hounding her and telling her, "You can't possibly publish this book. It's going to keep people away. It's going to keep primarily Black Americans away from medicine and from doctors, and that's already something that they had a hard time with." And how the author really does such a deep dive into that is not why Black communities that's not why Black communities stay away from medical practices so often. And this book does such a great job detailing all of that and how incredibly sad and horrible it is, and everything that they've suffered through under, white doctors with their own interests at heart. And it was just, it was so beautiful. It was heartbreaking. 5 stars. Absolutely cannot recommend to enough people. Okay, so next one I'm going to talk about is The Hellbound Heart by Clive Barker. This is the novel that the very popular film series Hellraiser is based off of, and I had recently watched Hellraiser for the first time, so I picked up The Hellbound Heart from the library, and I very much enjoyed it. It was very good. It's very, very similar to the movie. Oh, so sorry, Miss Doodle. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to touch your butt. And I think that a lot of the changes that were made between novel and movie were really good. I think making Christy his daughter was absolutely a fantastic change, because she's just this sort of lovesick puppy dog that's constantly following around Rory and Julia in the book. But overall, it was really good. The novel follows primarily Julia as she and her husband Rory move into his childhood home, and she finds his brother Frank has encountered something otherworldly and sinister, and it has left him in this horrible state, and she begins trying to help bring him back to our world. It was, oh bless you. It was a little gory. It was very creepy. It was very interesting. I very much enjoyed it, and highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in picking it up. Okay, so the next book that I can remember that's on my list is Night Bitch by Rachel Yoder. This would if I had done a 5-star predictions book, if I had done a 5-star predictions video, this would have been one of them on there. And guess what? I was fucking right. It is 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. It's following a woman in her early 30s, shortly after she's had a child. She has given up her job to be a stay-at-home mother for her son, and her husband is constantly away at work. It's a very weird book. It's a very, I don't want to call it cerebral book, but it's very artistic. And sorry, Uncle, I keep kicking you in the nose. I'm so sorry. And it's very heavily influenced by the art scene, in particular because the mother is an artist and has grown up as an artist. One second. And she finds herself thinking a lot in these sort of terms that are very reminiscent of an art exhibit. This is an absolutely strange and wild book that goes on some twists and turns, and I've seen some people who have read it who for the most part enjoyed it, really enjoyed everything except the ending, and I thought the ending was fantastic. I thought it was great. It was one of my favorite parts of the whole thing. I love when authors aren't afraid to leave something extremely open to interpretation, and they want you to be able to draw your own conclusions to was this real, was this not. I have seen some people on BookTube have recommended this if you really enjoyed All's Well, and I can second that, or 15th that, how probably 500th that. I do think if you enjoyed one, you will enjoy the other. And that's a pretty good litmus test as well for that kind of fiction being something you would enjoy. Okay, so I refreshed myself on my list. We're gonna keep going. Another book that I read was Mongrels by Stephen Graham Jones. This was very easily a 5-star. I absolutely adored this. This follows a young boy and his family and their lives as werewolves and as Native Americans. And it was extremely heartbreaking and sad, following them as they lived their life and dealt with not only racism but poverty, moving from one place to another, and with our main character's deep struggle to feel like he fit into his family and he fit into the wolf world, and him desperately wanting to be just like his uncle and to be just a part of the family. It's really just a family. I don't want to call it a drama. It's definitely a horror, but it's got a lot of those like family drama elements to it, right? You've got a young man struggling to feel like he fits in, desperate to be just like his uncle and his aunt, while still struggling to just live his fucking life and be a teenager and fall in love and make stupid decisions. And it was absolutely incredible. I will say, I'll give you fair warning, if you are sensitive like I am to animals being harmed in media, I would possibly walk away from this one and not attempt it. It was very, very, very much filled with with a lot of animal cruelty and a lot of animal death and a lot of very gory on-screen violence towards animals. Okay, the next one we talk about is Spoiler Burn by James S.A. Corey. This is book 4 in the Expanse novels. I've talked about this before, but I'm attempting to reread all of these novels before rereading the first 5, which is what I originally read, and then stopped reading them for several years before I finished the series and continue. So I read book 4, and this is, I can't remember what I gave this on reading, I can't remember what rating I gave this on Goodreads. It's either a 3-star or a 4-star. It's very much like one of the most 3.5 books I've ever read. Like, it was fine. It was alright, but it was not anything spectacular. This is definitely my least favorite in the series. It was when I read it several years ago, and it continues to be now. I think it's just a mediocre book, especially in a great series like The Expanse, and overall, it was fine. I don't think the characters were nearly as strong. My favorite parts were definitely Holden getting, I don't know how to talk about this without spoiling a lot of what happens in several of the other books, but there's kind of this continuing conversation around alien technology that Holden engages in, and I by far felt like that was the strongest point of the entire novel. Yeah, overall the new characters that were introduced, very meh, very eh. I do like that Havelock came back and that he had a part to play in this. But overall, a lot of the newer characters that were introduced I thought were easily forgettable. I'm struggling now to even remember one of the characters' names, who is she's one of the chapter title characters, and so I think that kind of says a lot about how forgettable these were. Okay, I'm going to try to talk about these next two quickly because I have dusted this and that's all I need to do in this room other than put stuff back on the floor. But I want to talk about two more books before I pause this to go film somewhere else. I want to talk about, very quickly, The Vegetarian by Han Kang. This was a 4-star book for me. I listened to the audiobook and the audiobook is absolutely amazing. I found this really enjoyable. It's very weird, deals with a lot of difficult subjects, and deals with a character who is really struggling in herself. I would definitely look up trigger warnings for this before you attempt to read this. I don't know what more I can say about this that hasn't already been said by a lot of other people. I thought that this was really engaging. It was really difficult to read, but I thought it was a really good read. And yeah. Oh, I should probably tell you the fucking synopsis, huh? You have a woman who is living in Korea with her husband, and she has a dream that encourages her and influences her to decide to stop eating meat. This is very strange for her husband. He becomes very upset, very controlling, and it completely changes the trajectory of their lives. And yeah, there you go. And then the next book I want to talk about is The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins, I think. Read and DNF'd a lot of books by Scott's this last couple of months. I read this one as part of the Buzzword Reading Challenge for July, I think. So this, The Hellbound Heart. I read that as the Buzzword Reading prompt for August, which was just an item, The Hellbound Heart. The Library at Mount Char I read for the Buzzword Reading prompt for July, which was bookish words, library, bookish word. This was 4 stars for me. This was just my kind of weird. It's strange. It makes not a lot of sense. It makes no attempt at trying to explain any of what's happening. Is there magic? I don't know. Shit's just going on, man. It was weird. It was strange. There's a lot of discussion on... I was flipping through something. There was a lot of discussion on religion and what religion means to different people and what godhood would mean to different people. It was very fascinating. I listened to the audiobook. It was extremely fast-paced and it was a good time. Okay, that's all. Also, I just want to say, does anyone else have a whole bunch of stolen books from their library that they're just holding on to for no reason? Because that's me. Hi, I feel really awkward doing this. This is really awkward, isn't it?
Oh, you'll be fine.
I'll get used to it, I guess. Okay. I don't know. Does this look all right?
You're putting it, in between us, so.
I can't see.
The sky looks beautiful.
I either have to look at myself or look at where I'm walking. I can't do both.
I'll hold your hand and guide you.
Thank you. Okay. Can you look over here? I know you'll have to cut this out.
Yeah.
But how's that look?
Looks good.
Okay, that's about where I can hold.
Yeah, it's a really good
head. Okay, so the first book I'm going to talk about, I'm going to try to do these really short, is Doomed by Chuck Palahniuk.
Mm-hmm.
Is the sequel to Damned. And it is still following the same protagonist, who I believe is named Maddie. I think. I don't know. It's been 2 months since I read this, and longer since I read the first one. You're following her after she has essentially gotten her soul trapped on Earth after escaping from hell, and she is seeing what's the word I'm searching for here? essentially the fruits of her labor in the first book, because she spends some time trying to communicate to her parents. There's gonna be a dog that's gonna bark. I knew it. She tries to convince her parents that Christianity got it wrong, and to get to heaven you actually have to do all the bad things, and her parents have basically started a cult around this. God, it's so awkward. It is for me. Hello, Rocks.
I remember you talking to me about this one.
Do you want to be in the frame at all?
I don't care. But no, I remember you talking to me about this one. And
Yeah.
what did you think of the first one?
So I remember I really loved the first one, but this was so long ago. This is, I believe, encroaching on 10 years ago. At this point, I think it's about 7 or 8 since the first one came out, and I was still very much loving everything Chuck Palahniuk did. And I'm still concerned that I'm just aging out of his writing, which is fine. And I was gonna reread the first one, but then I just decided, fuck it. I had the audiobook for the second one, and I didn't want to reread the first one, so I went into this one. And there were a lot of things about it. I think the wind is gonna make this utterly unusable, by the way.
We'll find out.
There were a lot of things about this one that I really hated. It's like with Chuck Palahniuk, it like either all makes sense or it all doesn't for me right now.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of this that just didn't. Specifically the scene in the highway restroom with the dog turd, which is about all I'm...
Yes, yeah, don't remember you telling me about this.
I didn't tell you about this, and we're not going to talk about it right now, because I know we're not monetized on YouTube, but that would quickly get us forever demonetized. That really didn't work for me. There were a lot of ways in which it just felt like it was using so much of the plot as an excuse to be either really gross or to use a lot of slurs. And again, I recognize that so much of the point of the book is that, like...
I remember you talking about the overuse of slurs.
Yeah. And it's like, there were a lot of...
It does kind of feel like a plot contrivance.
Yeah, there were a lot of times where it was like, it would only use like the N word once or the F slur once. But like, that's too many times.
Yeah, it's too many times, and one of the other things that I'll say about that is that, like, if it's part of the plot, like, it doesn't make sense. Once is just for shock value.
Yeah.
Once is not plot making. Once is for shock value.
Yeah.
Not for a plot.
Yeah. But there were some things I liked about it. I honestly don't know, kind of reflecting on it now. I'm like, did I really only like that because I'm damaged white girl and it was damaged white girl plot stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So, but like, I do think it had some like really sweet moments and some really like good moments for the main character, but overall it was really meh. I think I gave it... Yeah, is it something?
No, it's a dog.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads, but that's because on Goodreads you can't give half stars. This was like a 2.5 stars maximum for me, because it was just like right in the middle. Like, I didn't hate it.
Damn near 50%.
Yeah, I didn't hate it, but I also really didn't love it, or I didn't even really like it too much, but it wasn't something I felt like I had wasted my time with by the end of it. Okay, hi. I guess you can edit that first part out. I'm just laying on my heating pad trying to get my neck sorted because I have to sleep in funny ways because of my damn back and it's affecting my neck. Yay, I love being in my 30s with a broken fucking body. So, hold on. Hello, polar bear. I just wanted to quickly talk about, I hadn't really planned this out. I wanted to quickly talk about the Penelope Ad by Margaret Atwood. It's another book that I read in July, I believe. I ended up giving this 2 stars. It is a retelling, essentially, of Penelope's story, who is, one moment, who was the wife of Odysseus. And it's supposed to be a feminist retelling, and I actually just found it to be incredibly annoying for the most part. I really hate in feminist writing where we spend so much of the time just pitting women against women, and it was like so much of the story. It's so short. I think it's around 200 pages or slightly less than 200 pages. But so much of it is just focused on Penelope bitching about her cousin Helen of Troy, and how she was such a bitch in life, and how she's such a bitch in death, and how she's just, you know, so pretty, and she keeps putting Penelope down because she's not as pretty, and it felt really catty and really silly, and it really took away from any part of what could have made this really entertaining and good. Another thing that I think didn't always work was just the style it's written in. It's a lot of times it's Penelope telling her story, and there are interludes primarily by her, was it 13? I think it's 13 handmaids, or just maids, or servant girls. And the 13 servant girls have these interludes, and some of them are really good. It's like poetry, excerpts from a play or a television show sometime. A lot of it is poetry. There's one where it's basically a discussion on the change in Greek literature at this time, from being more matriarchal to being more patriarchal, and how Odysseus' story precipitated that, but was basically the catalyst for that. And that part was really interesting, and some of the poems were good. But for the most part, it just they just felt really off and really distant from it, and it just felt like you were kind of going from one thing into the next without a lot of not necessarily context, but just without a lot of warning. And another thing I really didn't like about it was I just thought it was really fucking boring. It was so short, but it took me way too long to read, and I just didn't think it was well written, and it made me really sad. Margaret Atwood is a major TERF, and I really try so hard not to give her a platform or financially support her in any way. I picked this up from the library, and I'm really glad I did, because I didn't like it, and I usually really enjoy her work. I usually find it really interesting or fascinating, and she often has characters that I really love. The camera's just moving slowly. But this one, unfortunately, was just not it for me, and I gave it 2 stars. Okay, so I wanted to talk about another book that I read in July, and that was Electra by Jennifer Saint. I gave this book 4 stars. This tells the story of Clytemnestra, which is Agamemnon's wife, and I almost said daughter, and then I almost said son, the sister of Helen of Troy, and mother to Iphigenia or Iphigenia. I'm not sure which one is correct. I was taught both in high school. And we're also following Electra, who is Clytemnestra's youngest daughter, and Agamemnon's youngest daughter, and Cassandra, Princess of Troy, who was cursed by Apollo with the gift of prophecy, but no one would ever believe her. This one was absolutely excellent. I loved it so much. I ended up giving it 4 stars, I believe. Not because there was anything wrong with it, but because it just felt right at a 4-star. I ran through this book so fast. I thought it was so good. I thought it was so interesting. I loved the different perspectives we got, and I loved the way they all interplayed with each other. This really and truly felt like a much better feminist retelling of a classic Greek myth than like the Penelope Ad was. Primarily, I think, because it really gave the women in the story a lot of agency, and again, not to just directly compare it, but in the Penelope Ad, it was, Penelope kind of pitting herself against Helen of Troy, or Helen pitting herself against Penelope a lot. But in this one, Helen was really just a person. She wasn't this like larger than life figure. She obviously wasn't one of the perspectives we got, but whenever she was a presence in anyone's chapter, she was just a person. She was one of the few people to really treat Cassandra with some compassion, and I thought that was such a good decision that the author made. Same with Clytemnestra. Towards the end of the book, there's a moment where they have this reunion, and it's very secretive. Clytemnestra has snuck herself into Helen and Menelaus's palace, and there's such a moment of tension between the two of them where you can tell that there's a lot of feeling, and this build up, especially because Helen leaving was the reason that Clytemnestra's oldest daughter was killed and sacrificed, and it's a really tense moment, and it really kind of breaks really beautifully, and it shows, it paints both of them in such a humanizing light, and it's really wonderful, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. Okay, so I'm gonna try to quickly do this like this. I have a moose saying hi. I just got back from my walk, icing my back, so we're gonna very quickly talk about The Ritual by Adam Neville. I'm gonna try and make this really short. This was a 2-star read for me. I listened to the audiobook, and this is a novel about 4 friends going on a hike in Sweden, like not just like a day hike, but like they're hiking a trail that's gonna take like a week or something, and they're reconnecting. They were college friends, and they've sort of fallen in and out of touch over the years, and they're trying to have like a bro weekend essentially, or week essentially, vacation. This was really just kind of like for me for about the first 60%. It was fine. I was enjoying the ride. I knew really quickly into it that I wasn't gonna love this, but I thought that's my corgis here. I thought there was something on my floor. I really thought that this would at least be really entertaining, if not like my next favorite read, and I was right, but only to a certain extent. So the first 60% really feels like a separate book from the last 40%. It's so disconnected, and it just, you go from this very isolated story that's really creepy. It was really creepy. There were times where I was listening to the audiobook at night where I was like physically turning around to look behind me because I thought I heard something, and I was genuinely creeped out. But it was very isolated. It was very creepy. It was very much in the characters' heads, and then it turned into satanic panic. Essentially, it was very weird. It was the direction it took the last 40% was very strange. I could tell something was going to happen because as we were approaching again that 60% mark, I was like, how does this still have almost half this book left? This is reaching a natural conclusion right now. What is happening? And then it took its turn. The last 40% is very different. It's very weird. I don't think it all really hung together. It tried to answer like too many questions, but not enough questions, but also it was completely unnecessary to have these other characters introduced, and just everything that happened until the end was just so much of a disappointment. The characters are really shallow. That's very evident very early. It was very hard for me to distinguish between the different guys in the group, like between Luke and Phil and Hutch and I can't remember the last guy's name. We're just going to call him Larry. It was very hard to distinguish between the four of them for a really long time. And then, I guess, mild spoilers, by the time they started dying off, I didn't care. I was like, oh great, one less person to try and keep track of. But there's also so much misogyny and, like, fat phobia and nonsense in there. It's, to an extent, you can really just be like, oh, well, we're so much in Luke's head, and he's a misogynist, and he's an asshole, and he's, very fat phobic towards his friend. But, like, it just becomes so grating and tiring after a while, because it does spend so much of the book just in these characters' heads, and specifically in Luke's head. It just becomes exhausting. This overall was 2 stars. I'm not even sure if it was worth my time to read, but there we go. Okay, we're going to try to do this in under a minute, so let's start that. Now, the next book I'm going to talk about is American Psycho by Bret Easton Ellis. If you are unfamiliar, this is a novel following Patrick Bateman, a mid-20s Wall Street broker and general yuppie in late 80s New York. He is a mass murdering dickhead, and the book is primarily a satire on the Wall Street culture at that time. This book is a massive satire of toxic masculinity, Wall Street broker culture in the 80s, and specifically of hyper-consumerism and hyper-capitalism. It is absolutely fantastic. It is the goriest and most violent book. Well, probably not goriest. Goriest is wrong. It is the most violent book I've ever read in my entire life. Absolutely loved it. It was my favorite book I read this month. I was genuinely shocked. A lot of violence in it. 10 out of 10. 5 stars. Would absolutely recommend if you have a stomach for it. Okay, so before it gets too dark, I also wanted to quickly mention Goddess of Filth by V. Castro. I read this in July, and it is a short novella following a group of friends trying to help their friend who has seemingly been possessed. I've seen a lot of people compare this to The Craft, and I think that's a pretty apt comparison, especially as a baseline for trying to find the book's audience. Overall, this was 3 stars for me. I plan on doing a more in-depth video on my thoughts on this one, so that's it. 2 of the novellas I read recently were To Be Devoured by Sarah Tantlinger and The Murders of Molly Southbourne by Today Thompson. You want me to hold it?
Okay. Trying to find the best place to hold the needle.
Yeah, absolutely. So, The Murders of Molly Southbourne is a novella about a young woman named Molly Southbourne who discovers at a very young age that every time she bleeds, a new Molly is created.
You read that one last month?
Last month or the month before, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Time has no meaning.
I know. And whenever she discovers this, her parents begin training her in how to protect herself, because eventually the Mollys always go feral, essentially.
Now, is this something that her parents, knew about? Is it something that other people have had to deal with?
Seemingly, no on the second one.
Okay.
The first one is left very open.
Okay. Not trying to spoil.
No, you're fine. It's very much left out in the open. It seems like she's the only person who is dealing with this.
Okay.
And it's very much left out in the open. I know it's a trilogy of novellas, I think.
Okay.
That I think think gets explored later on, but
Okay.
that is left vague. 1 second while I try not to trip over these rocks and injure my back more. Hi, hello.
I was trying to show the rocks.
Yes. Thank you. But I really enjoyed this one. I ended up giving it 4 stars. Not for any particular reason, it just felt like a 4-star book. I thought it did a really good job at leaving a lot of questions very open-ended while expanding a little bit on the world that this takes place in. And overall, I thought it was a really fun, short, enjoyable read.
Yeah.
Now, To Be Devoured by Sarah Tantlinger is one of my favorite things that I've read this entire year. Are your arms getting tired?
Yeah. Try it.
Okay. This shouldn't take too long. I purposely picked novellas. This is one of my favorite things I've read this entire year. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I was very much interested in it, and I had my eye on it, but then I saw the author posted on TikTok that it was going to cease publication unless another publisher picked it up, and I, through the wonderful cajoling of my husband, when I told him this, I bought it and then immediately read it. It was creepy, it was weird, it was filled with gore. This novella follows a young, well, I shouldn't say young, she's around our age, around a 30-something-year-old woman named Andy, as she begins to become obsessed with these vultures that are near her house and are beginning to congregate in the woods around her house. And she, through this obsession, begins to develop a desire to eat raw flesh. It was really creepy, really upsetting. There were some genuinely stomach-turning scenes that were just very gore-filled. In particular, this is a mild spoiler, but the vomiting up piglet bones was absolutely horrifying. Right? It was so good. I read it in one sitting, and I can't stop thinking about it.
Okay, hi. I'm in bed. I think you can tell. I have scared girls because there's a thunderstorm happening. This is literally my Hobie. Right here. This is her butt. She demanded to be the little spoon, so that's what she is. I wanted to quickly talk about one of the books, I think. Yeah, I'll talk about both books, a DNF, really fast, because it should be fast. One of them was Kill Creek by Scott Smith. It's a story, it's a novel about a group of writers that go to spend some time in a famous haunted house, and scary shit starts happening to them. I made it 100-something pages into it, I don't know. And I really got sick of the really intense misogyny and fat phobia really quickly. For a while there, it was like just entertaining and interesting enough to keep me hooked. There was something about the writing that had me continuing to read it. But it got really intense with the misogyny in particular. The camera's shaking because she started panting. But the misogyny in particular got really intense for me. I can't even remember her name now, but the female author, she was written so shittily and so poorly and like so weirdly and just really, really horribly, and I hated it so much, and I could just tell that everything was about to ramp up to like a 10. I'm messing with my bangs, don't judge me. And I just didn't want to read anymore, so I stopped. And then the other book I DNF'd was The Ruins by Scott Smith. Wait. It's not written by the same guy, right? Hold on, I'll be back. Kill Creek was written by Scott Thomas, not Scott Smith. They have similar names. The Ruins by Scott Smith. I have a history with this book. I tried to read it when I was 18 because I really wanted to watch the movie, but I really wanted to read the book first, and I fucking hated it. It's one of the few books that I can remember at that age, like, actively being like, I'm not gonna fucking read this anymore, and I'm gonna return it to the library. And I really hated it. I thought it was, at the time, sorry, my moose is moving. At the time, I thought that the characters were extremely flat and extremely boring and easily confused for one another. That opinion still holds up strong now. I got to 40% was this time around, which was far better than I did the first time. And I was listening to the audiobook because it was narrated by, I can't remember his name, but it's a famous actor. I'll ask my husband to put his name across the screen. I only got to 40%. I was bored. I was bored as hell. I thought it was poorly written. I didn't think it was tense. And we got to the point where one of the guys, I can't even remember their names. I know the girls were Stacy and Amy, but like Paul, John, Adam, Alex, I don't even remember the two guys' names. Oh, that was a big old thunder, wasn't it? Oh my goodness, I'm sorry. Where one of the guys who was describing him as like he was preparing for disaster his whole life, and I was like, this is bullshit, I'm not reading this anymore. Hi, okay, I know the lighting's a little intense right now, but we're just gonna deal with it. I'm about to do my stretches for my sciatic nerve, and I just really quickly want to come on here and talk about a couple of books because I'm really far behind and this needs to go out soon. What do I want to talk about? Oh, I'll just go ahead and talk about two more of the DNFs I had in the last 2 months. One of them was Cackle by Rachel Harrison, I believe. It was one I was going to read for the Goodreads Best of 2021 challenge. Unfortunately, this book it wasn't for me. It was in the horror category, and I like my horror to be a lot less, like, fluffy. That's the best word I have for that one. It was really kind of cute and sweet. I only got maybe 20% of the way into it, and I just realized it wasn't for me, and there was a long backlist of people waiting for it, the audiobook specifically. So I was like, fuck it. Why am I going to sit here and keep this from other people? The other book I DNF'd was The Storied Life of A.J. Vickery. Grabbed it for the Buzzword Reading Challenge, I think, of July, which was like a bookish word. So had storied in there, so I grabbed the audiobook. I DNF'd that fucker like 10% of the way in or something. Stop crying, Moose! I really didn't like the main character. I didn't like either of the main characters, but specifically A.J. Vickery. I found him to be extremely intolerable, and not in a way that, like, I thought was going to be fun or entertaining. And I didn't realize when I grabbed it that it was going to kind of be like a rom-com-y almost. That's the vibe I was getting from it. I don't really know if that's entirely what it's about, but that's how I felt. So I DNF'd it. Accidentally stopped the video, my bad. I know the lighting is really, again, it's still really weird. We're just going to try to keep my head here. So really quickly, I want to talk about Into the Drawing Deep by Mira Grant. I picked this up kind of as a last chance with this author, specifically with her pseudonym Mira Grant. I've read one Shauna Maguire, which is Middle Game, loved it, have the sequel, just haven't picked it up yet. Hey, settle, hun. But I read Parasite by Mira Grant several years back, and it was really just kind of meh for me. There were some things about it that were fine. I thought it had interesting ideas and concepts and themes, but I don't think it executed them all very well, and I thought that there were some very, very cliche things in there. And then last year, I listened to the audiobook for Into Spindrift House, which was her, like, cosmic horror Lovecraftian work, and I hated it a lot. Excuse me. Part of that might be because Lovecraftian stuff just doesn't typically work for me. But I also just didn't think it was very well written. I thought the characters were bland. I thought the entity wasn't truly, like, scary enough, and it was altogether too human. So I picked up Into the Drawing Deep because it's her most popular one, and I was like, okay, if this isn't good, then I'm just not going to pick up more Mira Grant, and that's fine. I'll keep reading Shauna Maguire stuff. Holy shit, this was incredible. It was scary, it was spooky. I thought that the representation in the book was really good. There were
Two, there were deaf twins in here, and I thought that was great. They were really fascinating and interesting characters. I thought the inclusion of their hearing sister, who often worked as their translator, was really fun, and really got to explore a depth of the difficulties that disabled people face in the world, and specifically deaf people face in the world. My back started to hurt. I need to stand, so I've moved. 1 second. Let me adjust that. Okay. But I thought it was really scary. I thought it was really dark, really creepy, really unsettling. I thought the sirens or mermaids were really, really good. I thought they were really creepy. I thought one of the things I really liked about this was, I think that at least in 2 Mira grants I've read previously, it felt like there were definitely answers for everything, at least somewhere along the way. Okay, we're gonna do this here. Again, bad lighting. Sorry, deal with it. I felt like in Parasite, which was I think the first book in a trilogy or something like that, you could tell that there were gonna be, god damn it, I just keep messing with my fucking bangs, which are fucking filthy. But I don't want to wash them because I just dyed my hair. Okay, I moved again. We're gonna deal with it. Trying to get my head in the way. Okay. We're gonna hope the phone doesn't fall. I felt like in Parasite, you could tell it was really setting up for the whole trilogy to have a lot of answers to everything and try to answer a lot of the questions it asked, which is fine. That's great, especially for a longer series of books. But I often think that horror authors don't play enough with the unknown, and they answer too many questions, and it takes a lot of the fear out of everything. That was definitely how I felt about Into Spindrift House. I felt like any questions it wanted to leave open, it really didn't. It really just gave them a firm answer and took away a lot of the mystery of it. But I think that Into the Drowning Deep did a really good job of still preserving a lot of that. Now, that could be by nature of what it was, and it, it's this scientific exploration vessel going to find out about something that very little people know about and very little people have any concrete information on. I thought the ending, honestly, the ending was a little abrupt, but I think it worked out really well. I gave it 5 stars on Goodreads. My one complaint is that I think that more people should have died. More like characters that were crucial to the story should have died. It felt like everyone kind of had some really good plot armor. But it was still really good. I thought it was really creepy. It was really unsettling. I ended up reading this over the course of 2 days. I was very intrigued. I was very interested. I did not want to put it down. So it's a great book if you feel like picking it up. Okay, so next books we're going to talk about are Just Like Mother by Anne Heltzel, Vicious by V.E. Schwab, and Convenience Store Woman by, I believe it's Sayaka Murata. I believe that is it. Could be completely wrong on that. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So first, we're going to talk about Just Like Mother. I think it should be pretty indicative how I felt about this book based on how much I keep forgetting that I read it, and the fact that I was staring at this book on my list earlier, being like, I have to commit this to memory, and I just can't. My moose is still crying, I'm sorry. This was one of my more anticipated reads this year, just purely based off of the cover. I thought the cover was incredible, and it's a culty book, not a cult like OCC, but my husband came in, so I stopped filming. One second, here's a hair. Just trying to get in my eyeball. Stop trying to be meal part bangs. That's not what you're here for. This novel is about a woman who, when she was a child, escaped a cult called the Mother Collective. One moment. Petra, settle. Honey. In such a mood. Such a mood. But she escaped this cult when she was young, and sorry, I gotta cut some of that out. Her and her cousin were both young children in this cult, and whenever it was disbanded forcefully by authorities, they were separated. And she has struggled her whole life with a lot of guilt surrounding everything that happened, and as an adult, her and her cousin get back in touch and begin to try to repair their relationship. Goodness. Overall, I thought that this was it was alright. I think I gave it 3 stars on Goodreads. Hun Bun, settle. I think I said previously that this was there was a book that was like the most 3.5 star book I'd read in a long time. This was like the most 2.5 star book I've read in a while. It was fine. It was fine. There were some things about it that I thought were really enjoyable. There were a lot of things I thought about it that were just kind of boring. Overall, I think that one of the things that didn't work for me was the scale of this. I think if it had been, ow, what kind of pokey motherfucker is in here? Okay. I think if the scale of this had been brought down, it would have worked better. It got a little too big and a little too grand for me, especially as the end began chugging along. I think it just got too big for itself and too big for our characters. One of the other issues that I had overall with this book was really trying to keep these short, but I just ended up fucking rambling. Another issue I had with this book is it really felt like the plot was just all over the place. There was just so fucking much happening, and it very quickly just became too much. It was too much. It wasn't difficult to follow. I kind of knew where everything was going after a while, but it was just too much. It was too much, man. It was too much. Okay, the next book I'm going to talk about is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. This was a 4-star for me. In this, we're following Victor and Eli, 2 young men who were college-aged best friends, and they began experimenting with creating what they call EOs, which are extraordinaries. These are superheroes, essentially. Overall, I thought it was fine. It was 4 stars. I'm so displeased with my bangs today. One of the biggest things about this book that made me give it 4 stars is I got to a point towards the end of the book.
Can I share something with you?
Sure! Okay, small husband break. Not small husband break, but a small break because of my husband. That didn't need to be explained. So, I was talking about Vicious by V.E. Schwab. This was a 4-star book. I think I explained what they're following. I was talking about the reason I gave it 4 stars instead of 3 stars. I reached this point in time with the book where I was reading it, and I started getting, I don't always get this like super anticipation while reading where I'm like, what's gonna happen next? Oh my god, are the characters gonna be okay? And like that kind of feeling of I need to skip ahead to see if to find out. And I got that with this one. I was very, very like amped up, and I could feel like my heart racing a bit and all that kind of stuff around this book. And I because I don't get that a lot, I was super excited, and I I was like, oh wow, this book has really got to be doing something if I'm sitting here feeling that. And I do think it did. And the thing I think it did right was the characters. I thought Sydney in particular, and oh god, his name has slipped my mind because it's been a few weeks. But the person that Victor's traveling around with, I really loved them in particular. I thought they were great. I thought that for a superhero story, it did a really good job of not just trotting out like the old standbys, you know, like regeneration or, you know, anything like Superman-esque or anything like that. Thought it did a really good job of introducing some very new and very interesting and intriguing powers. And I thought that was really exciting. I thought Victor's ability was so unique and so interesting. I think as far as like some of like, again, like the old kind of standbys and the old always good in stories, I thought Sydney's ability to bring people back from the dead was really interesting as well, and really handled well, especially for a young girl to have such a difficult and really frightening ability. Trying to decide where everything's going, because I have such a difficult time with this shelf. Feeling like I like the setup on it, so I'm having some difficulty. I remember the thing I was going to talk to my husband about, but he's out in the garage. Let's see if I remember when he comes back in. Yeah, overall I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really good. I picked up the sequel from my library, which isn't entirely an accurate representation of what happened, because what happened is I finished it and I went, oh, I really enjoyed that. I should go ahead and put a hold in for the sequel, because I bet it'll come in a couple weeks. And then a day and a half later, it was at my library. So I ended up returning it before I got to it, just because I was running out of time and there were other holds on it, so I couldn't easily renew it for the length of time I needed to. Ew. But I'm hoping I can pick the sequel up whenever I have some time, just to have gone ahead and wrapped up the series, because I'm trying to not get myself started in on like a dozen new series with no intention of ever finishing them. I will say really quickly about this one, it was the same way I kind of felt with A Darker Shade of Magic. Is I'm reading these whenever the series is complete, right? And so I'm coming in like, oh, I know it left itself open for a sequel, but I don't really think it needed a sequel. And so I'll be interested to see how it all kind of works out, especially because it seems like the sequel doesn't really follow Victor or Eli as much. I think that's a rather good decision, because, well, maybe not like completed, it did feel like their stories wrapped up rather nicely in the first one. So sorry, you can't even see that shelf. That didn't help any. I'm not gonna move you down there. You can't see what it was like before. It was a mess before. So I'm just really pleased that it looks like really nice and clean right now, because I struggle with that shelf a lot. I feel like I rearrange it 3 times a year. Okay, so let's do like this, because I'm gonna be sitting. Is this okay? This is okay. Yeah. Okay, so last book that I have to talk about is Convenience Store Woman. I can't remember what I gave this on Goodreads. I either gave it 4 or 5. If I gave it a 4, I should have given it a 5. It's amazing. I thought that this was going to get weird, and it never got beyond the scope of like, you know, like just people are kind of strange, right? Like I thought it might get like a little freaky, a little like little supernatural or paranormal, and it never did any of that. One second, I'm gonna sit right back down, but I gotta make sure. I'm gonna grab all the shit that was supposed to go here. Alright. It's not shit, it's some of my husband's small handy stuff, but I wanted it all together. Perfect. But it never got beyond like the scope of, you know, people can be cruel or unkind or that, or anything beyond just sort of this like mundane strangeness, I guess. And I don't even want to call it strangeness. Our main character is living her life, and she's often struggled to find her place in the world. And then when she was going to college, a new convenience store opened up near her apartment, and it was one of the first times in her life she felt really drawn to a place, and she felt like this could be her place. And so she has made her living here for the last 18 years. I believe this was, I don't think this was this author's first English work. It actually might have been, now that I'm thinking about it, but it's set in Japan, and this is a Japanese author, and because it is set in Japan, this woman still being in sort of her mid-30s, or not still, but her being in her mid-30s and still working at a convenience store is seen as strange by her peers. She has rekindled some friendships with some high school acquaintances and her family, and everyone is always pressuring her to marry or to move on to a more ambitious job, or what is seen as more of an adult job. And she doesn't want to. She loves her store. She loves everything about it. It gives her a schedule. It gives her an extreme sense of belonging, and it makes her so happy. And then a man starts working at the store who seemingly fits into some of her same personality traits, or not fits in, but he has some of her same personality traits. So he has a hard time with social interaction without like preparing for it and everything like that. And they begin this kind of unusual friendship. And it was short, it was beautiful. I think I read this almost entirely in one sitting. And I thought that the message behind it was just really incredible, of especially like in this, you know, capitalistic hellscape that we're all living in right now, right? There's always this pressure to ascend the ladder until you meet your point of failure. And once you meet your point of failure, you keep at it, and you don't acknowledge that you can't, that's beyond your scope of capabilities, and you just keep doing a poor job because you need to keep making more money, and you need to keep selling your labor and all of that. And for this character to really have just committed herself wholeheartedly to this store and to have loved it so much, it's really beautiful. It was so sweet. I was almost crying by the end of it, and I really love that so much of the story just really centers around, you know, reinforcing that this character, because I've forgotten her name because it's been a few weeks again, that she doesn't need to change herself to fit in with anyone. If this is what she loves, this is what she should do. So I loved it. Okay, this is going to be a really long video. I don't know if you want to like cut here and then come back here at the very end, but this is going to be a really long video. I'm so sorry for that. It's due to the nature of all of this. I couldn't come in with notes and ready-made plan for what I wanted to talk about with it, and I didn't really make a lot of notes along the way, especially the last several weeks, because of my back and how murderous it has felt. But I hope you had a good time with this. Depending on how this goes, we might start doing more wrap-ups sort of in this style, hopefully a lot more composed and put together, and hopefully sort of ideally happening right after I've read the books if I'm going to do it this sort of piecemeal style, because I think that is the thing that has been the worst, 1 second, about doing this for me, and I think it will be the worst for editing and for viewing, is that it's sometimes takes me a little bit to get going, to get my to get my memory running again, to tell me what the book was about and what my thoughts were while I was reading it. But so we might do more like this, but hopefully they're a lot more concise and easy to follow and not so chaotic, but we'll see. I hope, 1 second, let me set that there. I hope you're having a wonderful day. If you're not, I'm so sorry, but just know that you're loved and that you're worthy of being here. And I don't know, why did I get all sentimental? That was weird. But anyways, do algorithm things if you want. If not, I don't really fucking care. And I hope you had a good time. Bye.